Final Fantasy XV has miraculously been out for 2 years, and with that has come some interesting, and I'm sure what is disheartening news to many. But before any proper news about the game was dropped on its 2nd year anniversary, on the day prior, Square Enix reported an extraordinary loss of $33 million during a 6-month period that ended on September 30th, regarding the March-established subsidiary studio, Luminous Productions, a studio comprised of the key staff and more of Square Enix's Business Division 2, the division that created Final Fantasy XV. It's hard to say what incurred this loss, but given the 6-month time frame the loss reports, and possibly if any development on the burned-up project or projects began during the year gap between 15's release and the studio's establishment, my guess is that the pre-production phase of a large game project fell flat for whatever reason. Miscommunication, disagreement, poor management, absurd scope. There's a lot of reasons this could have happened. And while this report was curious and difficult to make heads or tails of, the following day, on the 2nd anniversary, the repercussions of this financial loss were made apparent, especially in the first piece of news, which is that 3 of the 4 The Dawn of the Future DLCs for Final Fantasy XV have been cancelled, those being the Noctis, Lunafreya, and Aranea episodes, whereas episode Arden is still slated for a March 2019 release, with the reason for the cancellation being to completely shift the focus of Luminous Productions to AAA development. Basically, because of this huge loss, these tiny DLCs aren't worth spending more money on, and these developers need to be put on a large, hopefully more lucrative project instead. And the reason episode Arden ironically survives is because it's probably far enough down the development pipeline at this point that they may as well finish it. Or maybe they feel this one is necessary to round out 15 and that they should at least release one and save some face. Can't blame them. But now the second big, shocking piece of news is very curious, as the circumstance of this is impossible to know and is left up to speculation for now, but it may just ultimately be a result of the financial loss regardless of who is at fault for it. But the piece of news is that Hajime Tabata, the director of Final Fantasy XV, the director of Final Fantasy Type 0, which you should play that if you haven't, and Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, the guy who was the face of Final Fantasy for a while, and the guy who is the head of this new studio, has departed Square Enix and Luminous Productions. Whoa. His letter of formal departure makes this sound like he's left on his own terms, and that he has a good idea of what he wants to do, and that he's going to write his own ticket from now on, which is awesome. I'm inclined to believe he's at little fault here for this loss, and this truly is him leaving on his own terms for whatever reason. Maybe he was mistreated, tired of poor management, or he just found another avenue that'll let him do what he wants, and he's going to pursue that now because the other project just didn't take off. But of course, it is possible he was at a large fault for this loss, and this is him being fired in the way that large companies fire figureheads by having them depart. And there is credence to this possibility, as Luminous Productions was created under the guise of creating more than just AAA games for a global audience, as other entertainment content is listed as to what the studio would be creating. And if Tabata ended up dabbling in unfamiliar territory, he may have burned that money up. Now, I shouldn't think so binary on this. It was probably somewhere in the middle, or maybe even mutual. There's too many possibilities here, but maybe in the coming weeks, or even days, some juicy gossip will drizzle out about this like it often does. But regardless of why he's departed, and regardless of the messy and inconsistent quality of Final Fantasy XV, Tabata-san, if you're listening, after having played Crisis Core, Type 0, and 15, and I wish I have played before Crisis, it looks really cool, I know you have the capability and the heart to make a timeless classic, and wherever you go, that you're given what's necessary to do so. And thanks for everything you've done at Square Enix, especially your depiction of Cloud in Crisis Core, since it's the only piece of FF7 media since FF7 to get him right. On a quick side note of that, frankly, as much as I enjoy the gameplay of Nomura's games, I would have greatly preferred Tabata to be the one heading up the 7 remake development, as he's handled the game's material the best since the original. I know, Genesis is questionable, but the core, Final Fantasy VII parts were done well, and Cloud wasn't the emo boy everyone who played Kingdom Hearts thinks he is. But I digress. Now, aside from all that sentiment towards Tabata, this news does mark the inevitable end to Final Fantasy XV, and really an end of the Versus 13 era, one of the three major "when the hell is this game coming out?" projects that Square Enix is notorious for. It's finally at an end. Now, while the Arden DLC looks damn cool, and I will play it if I have enough room on my PS4, it's not going to fix this game's core issues. I'm not going to say it wouldn't have been nice to have the other 3 episodes to round out the game by giving 2 supporting characters some much needed spotlight, or what sounded like an extension to the game's end with Noctis once he's ascended the throne, but the bottom line is that the world needs to move on from Final Fantasy XV. 15 is an important game to me, as it was the mess that spurred me to make videos, to get my thoughts out there, to figure out what's important to me in games, what's good design and what's bad, and hopefully that others will learn or discover something from what I produce, or that I've put their thoughts into articulation where they may have had trouble or didn't realize this is how they felt. And it's also just something I've spent so much time dreaming about throughout my life. And I'm one of those people that falls into the camp of, hey, I bought a PS3 for Versus 13, I can't wait. It's just something I've always coveted. But even so, 2 years later, having digested the game, played the DLCs, which weren't much, I apologize if any of you that have been with me since the beginning were hoping to see my extended thoughts on those, but they're simply as much of a hot mess as the base game. Then also seeing the Royal Edition bonus content, once again, not much, and then knowing there were 4 more DLCs in the works, it all just left me exhausted and uninterested, since I knew nothing they could have added, grafted, or changed to this game could have ever fixed it. And yes, there are good things about the game. It's not a complete lost cause. I love Ignis, the ending is executed well, Arden's a great villain compared to other Final Fantasy villains, and Arenea's a freaking cutie, but it's too little, too late. The only thing that could do it justice is probably making Versus 13 with all its intended concepts, gameplay, story, and scenarios. Maybe that's not as worthwhile as I dream it to be, but it doesn't matter anyway. It's time to move on, just like they literally did. Cut the loss and move on to something that can be greater. Once the Arden DLC is out, it'll have been 13 years, that's right, Versus 13 years, from the announcement of Versus 13 to the completion of 15. And while maybe there's some spin-offs in the works, since they've liked doing that at some point, there's a lot they could work with. If they're secondary and don't impose on could-be progress of a mainline title, that's fine. But personally, and as nefarious as this is going to sound, man, do I never want to see anything about this game ever again, and that whatever world, characters, music, aesthetic, and gameplay that FF16 boasts, that it blows 15 and people's attachment to it away, and that a new, shorter-lived era will refresh the world and this series. I know that sounds harsh, but think of it this way. If a wholly original and unique mainline Final Fantasy game is announced in the coming year, and released a year or so after, it'll have been about a minimum of 10 years since Final Fantasy XIII, the last fresh mainline Final Fantasy. There have not been new characters to look forward to, a new setting, a new art style, a new soundtrack, new gameplay, nothing. Nothing to be exciting about. Sure, 15's announcement was riveting, but this series needs a proper, special, original comeback. Especially with a bunch of veteran IPs recently flexing how they still got it and can still do it for a while longer more. That the envelope can still be pushed and that they'll set the bar to be derived from instead of doing so from others. Hiroyuki Ito, the director of Final Fantasy IX and XII, as well as Motomu Toriyama, the director of 10-2 and all the 13s, have to be working on something big, and I just pray that sometime next year, probably E3, that would be the time to do it, once the dust is settled on Kingdom Hearts 3, a game I am worried about, that Final Fantasy XVI is announced and is done so without worrying about having to sell or make room for the FF7 remake. It's Final Fantasy fucking 7, you don't have to sell that game. People are going to be excited about that regardless. And as much as I am against Square Enix's horrible habit of announcing things before the staff is even chosen, I need to know that a unique future exists for Final Fantasy. And I just pray that Square Enix can get it together and figure out how to properly produce AAA games again. I think Kingdom Hearts 3 is going to be the testament as to whether or not they've managed to figure that one out, and that they don't stray from their trend of publishing AA games like Nier Automata or Octopath Traveler, since they've been having a good run with those lately, and it at least shows they know how to produce something well. I know I've ranted on a bit here, but it's oddly sentimental to get news like this out of nowhere, since in my heart, I've yearned for this series, and really Square Enix, to move on, but it's still been a notable part of my life, having spent so much time dreaming about Versus 13 and then agonizing over 15, and with one of the three Please Just Come Out sagas closing up finally, and another nearing its end. Hopefully the third one starts to do so soon, so that there's nothing left to linger on, and that Square Enix will have to make new things that come out within a reasonable time frame after announcement, please! But that all said, farewell, Final Fantasy 15, and good luck, Hajime Tabata. And please get it together, Square Enix. Thanks for watching, everyone.